The air in the tent was a thick, suffocating blanket woven from damp canvas, stale cooking smells, and unspoken anxieties. For weeks, it had been their world, a flimsy, magically reinforced bubble against the vast, hostile British countryside. Inside, every cough echoed, every rustle of a page sounded like a gunshot, and every flicker of Harry's wan light cast dancing shadows that seemed to mock their solitude. Ron Weasley, hunched over a meager bowl of watery mushroom soup, felt the weight of it all pressing down on him. The endless hunger that gnawed at his stomach was a constant, dull ache, but the hunger in his soul was far worse. He watched Harry, so quiet and burdened, and Hermione, whose brow was perpetually furrowed over yet another heavy tome, and felt the familiar, bitter tang of inadequacy. He was just Ron, the youngest brother, the sidekick, the one who always seemed to fall short. "Anything useful, Hermione?" Harry asked, breaking the silence, his voice rough with fatigue. He was cleaning his glasses with the edge of his sleeve, his eyes still red-rimmed from another night of restless sleep and prophetic nightmares. Hermione sighed, pushing her spectacles up her nose. "Only more obscure references to the properties of goblin silver and the historical inaccuracies of 16th century divination practices. Nothing about, you know." She didn't need to finish the sentence. "Horcruxes." The word hung in the air, heavy and menacing. Ron scraped his spoon against the bottom of his bowl, the sound grating. "Great. More useless facts while Voldemort's out there having a laugh." He didn't mean for the words to come out so sharp, but a cold, prickly feeling had settled in his gut for days now, making him irritable, making him snappish. It felt like ants crawling under his skin, a constant, low-level irritation. Harry shot him a look, a mixture of patience and exasperation. "We're all tired, Ron." "Oh, am I the only one allowed to be tired now?" Ron retorted, pushing the empty bowl away with a clatter. His hand brushed against a stack of potions ingredients on the small table, dried sprigs of dittany, a vial of murtlap essence. The small vial of essence wobbled precariously. Hermione glanced up, her lips pursed. "Ron, please be careful. We don't have an unlimited supply of." Before she could finish, the murtlap essence vial suddenly tipped. Not slowly, but with a sharp, deliberate push, as if an invisible finger had flicked it. It crashed to the floor, shattering into glistening shards and a pungent puddle. All three froze. "Ron!" Hermione exclaimed, eyes wide. "What was that for?" Ron stared at the broken vial, then at his hand, which was still hovering near the edge of the table. I didn't do that. I barely touched it." Harry exchanged a look with Hermione. "You definitely pushed it, Ron. We saw you." "No, I swear." Ron felt a flush creep up his neck. It felt like a push, but he hadn't consciously done it. He felt that cold, prickly sensation intensify, a shiver running down his spine despite the stuffy tent. It just went. Hermione, ever practical, pulled out her wand. Reparo. The shards clinked back together, the murtlap essence reformed within the vial, but a faint, unpleasantly sulfurous smell lingered. She eyed Ron suspiciously. "Are you feeling all right, Ron?" "You've been jumpy." "I'm fine," Ron mumbled, though he felt anything but. He was jumpy, yes, but not because he'd chosen to be. It was like his nerves were stretched taut, vibrating with an unseen energy. And sometimes, when the tent was quiet, he heard things. Whispers, just at the edge of hearing, like a radio tuning between stations. They always seemed to be murmuring his name. That night, the whispers grew bolder. As Harry and Hermione finally drifted into a fitful sleep, Ron lay awake on his cot, staring at the canvas ceiling. The air in the tent grew colder, a bone-deep chill that seemed to emanate from nowhere. Then, a distinct voice, raspy and low, spoke directly into his ear. "Useless. Always useless. A burden." Ron gasped, sitting bolt upright. He whipped his head around, straining his eyes in the gloom. "Harry? Hermione?" Silence. "They don't need you. Never did." The voice was inside his head, yet it also seemed to echo from the very walls of the tent. It was familiar, yet utterly alien. It sounded like his own darkest thoughts, twisted and amplified. He clamped his hands over his ears, squeezing his eyes shut. Stop it." Suddenly, the cot beneath him shook violently, throwing him against the canvas wall. The flimsy table laden with books and potions next to Hermione's bed rattled, and a heavy volume of Hogwarts, a history, levitated slowly into the air before dropping with a deafening thud. Harry and Hermione bolted awake, wands already drawn, eyes wide with alarm. "What in Merlin's beard was that?" Harry demanded, his voice trembling slightly. His wand beam swept around the tent, illuminating nothing out of the ordinary, save for the fallen book. Ron was huddled against the wall, trembling. The voice, it spoke to me. And the bed, it shook me. Hermione was already on her feet, scanning the tent with an intensity that bordered on frantic. A boggart? An infurious? No, it felt different. She cast a quick hominum revelio, but nothing registered. No signs of intruders. "It's getting colder," Harry murmured, pulling his blanket tighter around him. "Foolish boy, weakling. They see it too," the voice hissed, directly into Ron's ear again. He flinched visibly. "What voice, Ron?" Hermione asked, concern etching her face. "Are you sure you're not just stressed?" "We all are." "It's not stress," Ron yelled, pushing himself away from the wall, his own voice cracking. "It's real. It's telling me I'm useless." He gestured wildly around the tent, his hands shaking. "It pushed the vial, didn't it? It made the bed shake." Harry and Hermione exchanged another uneasy glance. The cold was deepening, and the tent fabric began to ripple and billow as if caught in a strong gale, even though outside, the night was still. Over the next few days, the disturbances escalated from unsettling to terrifying. Objects didn't just tip, they flew across the tent. Harry's enchanted watch disappeared only to reappear in Ron's soup. Hermione's quill hovered menacingly over her head before dipping itself into her ink bottle and then, inexplicably, drawing crude, demeaning caricatures of Ron in the margins of her research notes. Ron himself grew gaunt, his eyes sunken and bloodshot. He snapped at Harry for trivial things, accused Hermione of whispering behind his back, and often stared blankly into space, as if listening to something they couldn't hear. He would frequently clutch his head, whimpering about the whispers, the incessant drone of doubt and mockery. One evening, while Harry was outside trying to catch a rabbit for dinner, a desperate, mostly futile attempt at foraging, Hermione was inside, carefully preparing a pot of stew. Ron sat hunched by the meager fire, shivering uncontrollably. "Are you sure you don't have a fever, Ron?" Hermione asked, worried. She reached out to touch his forehead. Before her fingers could make contact, Ron flinched back violently. His eyes, usually a warm blue, seemed cloudy, distant. "Don't touch me," he snarled, his voice a low, guttural growl that was distinctly not his own. A heavy cooking pot, full of rapidly boiling stew, suddenly lifted from the fire stand. It hung suspended in the air for a horrifying moment, steaming and sputtering, before hurtling straight towards Hermione. "Protego!" Hermione screamed, throwing up a desperate shield charm just in time. The stew splattered harmlessly against the shimmering barrier, but the force of the impact sent a shockwave through the tent, knocking over the fire stand and scattering embers across the floor. Ron, still hunched by the fire, let out a pained cry, as if the effort had physically hurt him. He clutched his head again, his body shaking like a leaf. "No, I didn't. I couldn't." Hermione's shield dissolved, her face pale with terror. She stared at Ron, then at the scattered embers, then back at Ron. His body was trembling, his mouth open in a silent scream. Harry burst into the tent at the sound of the commotion, his wand already out, a skinny, limp rabbit dangling from his other hand. He took in the overturned fire, the splattered stew, Hermione's terrified face, and Ron, who now looked utterly broken. "What happened?" Harry demanded, his eyes darting between them. Hermione could only point a trembling finger at Ron. Ron, he threw the pot at me, Harry. He used magic, but he didn't even say a spell, and his voice, it wasn't him." Ron was now rocking back and forth, muttering incoherently. Get out of my head, leave me alone." "Oh, but this is much more fun than solitude, isn't it, boy?" A distinct, mocking whisper seemed to emanate directly from Ron's chest, though his lips didn't move. The tent lights flickered madly, casting grotesque shadows that danced around them. Harry's blood ran cold. He had seen dark magic, powerful curses, frightening creatures. But this felt ancient, primal. He looked at Ron, whose eyes now seemed to hold a flicker of something ancient and malevolent beneath the fear. This wasn't just Ron losing his temper or succumbing to stress. This wasn't illness. "Ron," Harry whispered, taking a step forward. "Who's in there with you?" Ron suddenly stiffened. His head snapped up and his gaze locked onto Harry. The fear in his eyes was replaced by a chilling, predatory gleam. A slow, unsettling smile stretched across his face, not Ron's smile, but something cruel and vast. "A guest, dear boy," the voice hissed, clearer now, emanating fully from Ron's mouth, distorting his familiar features into a grotesque mask. "A guest who finds this little vessel quite delightful." Harry and Hermione stared, horrified, as Ron's body, their best friend's body, began to levitate slowly off the floor. His legs dangled uselessly, his arms hung limp, but his head remained upright, that chilling smile fixed in place. The tent groaned under an unseen pressure, the magical ward straining. Books shot from shelves, hitting the canvas walls with violent thuds. Cutlery danced a frantic jig on the table. The very air vibrated with a malevolent glee. "Ron!" Hermione cried, tears welling in her eyes. "Fight it! Ron, you have to fight it." The poltergeist, using Ron's body, let out a short, sharp laugh that curdled their blood. "Fight? Oh, he's already quite exhausted from fighting himself, isn't he? So much insecurity, such delicious despair. This is just the beginning." Ron's eyes, once again, flickered with a desperate plea, a glimpse of the real Ron trapped within, before the malevolent gleam returned. He was no longer just possessed. He was being worn like a cloak, his essence smothered. Harry stood frozen, his wand still pointed uselessly at the levitating form of his best friend. Hermione, though terrified, was already moving, her mind racing. This wasn't a simple curse. This wasn't a potion. This was something ancient, something that preyed on the soul. And it was inside Ron. "We have to help him," Harry finally choked out, his voice raw with a sudden, desperate resolve. "Hermione, what is this? What do we do?" Hermione tore her gaze away from the horrifying spectacle of Ron's possessed body. Her eyes, though wide with fear, had already begun to sharpen with determination, the analytical part of her brain kicking into overdrive. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the increasing chaos of the tent. "But I have to find out. This is something dark. Something that eats at the very core of a person. It's not a hex, Harry. It's possession. And if we don't find a way to get it out, it will destroy him." As she spoke, a sudden, powerful gust of wind ripped through the tent from within, slamming them both against the canvas walls. Ron's possessed body spun in the air, his head thrown back in a silent, chilling roar that shook the very foundations of their desperate sanctuary. The faint, horrifying smile remained, a promise of utter devastation. Ron, their friend, was gone, replaced by an invisible horror wearing his skin. And they had no idea how to bring him back. The air in the tent had grown thick and cloying, heavy with fear and a cold dread that seeped into their bones. Ron lay thrashing on his cot, not in the panicked, confused way he had before, but with an unnatural, violent energy. His limbs moved with a jerky, puppet-like rhythm, his back arching into impossible curves. His eyes, usually a familiar blue, were now wide and unfocused, darting around the tent as if unseen terrors played out before them. A thin, guttural laugh, too deep and too sinister to be Ron's, bubbled from his throat. "Lost, aren't we?" the voice rasped, vibrating through Ron's chest, distorting his features into a grotesque caricature of his own face. So much fear, so much inadequacy. A feast? Harry scrambled back from the cot, wand raised, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Get out of him," he snarled, but the words felt futile, powerless against the unseen force. "And who are you to command? The famous Potter? Your light is dimming." He feels it, too. The weight of expectations, crushing him. Ron's head lolled to the side, his neck bending at an awkward angle, and the horrible, alien laugh echoed again, making the tent fabric ripple around them. Hermione, pale but resolute, was already rifling through her beaded bag, pulling out every diagnostic charm and medical text she possessed. Renervate, she tried, but the beam of light dissolved before it reached Ron, absorbed by the volatile aura surrounding him. Vulnerus and enter. She tried to mend a small cut on his cheek where he'd scraped it on the cot frame, but the wound seemed to deepen, oozing blackish fluid for a moment before receding, as if mocking her efforts. The poltergeist, or whatever it was gaining strength, its control over Ron's body becoming frighteningly absolute. He sat up suddenly, his eyes locking onto Harry with chilling intensity. His hand, shaking uncontrollably, shot out, seizing a heavy iron lantern from a nearby table. It flew across the tent, missing Harry's head by a hair's breadth and embedding itself with a sickening thud into the canvas wall. "Ron, stop it!" Harry yelled, desperate. "Fight it, mate. Don't let it. He can't. He's weak. Always has been. The sidekick. The spare." The mocking voice seemed to delight in Ron's agony, twisting his face into a pained grimace even as his body remained under its control. Ron's fist clenched and unclenched, his muscles twitching like severed nerves. He made a low, choking sound, a genuine Ron sound, a sound of profound distress, before the alien laugh overtook it again. Hermione had abandoned the medical texts. She was throwing aside dusty volumes on dark arts, ancient curses, anything that hinted at the manipulation of the living by the dead. Her movements were sharp, precise, fueled by a terrifying focus. The small, magically enlarged space of the tent was a maelstrom of floating books, parchment, and discarded tools. "It's not an illness, Harry," she whispered, her voice strained, not looking up from a particularly thick, leather-bound tome. "It's something else. It feeds on his fear, on his insecurity." "I gathered that," Harry snapped, dodging a flying saucepan that slammed into his side. He tried to cast a Petrificus Totalis at Ron, but the spell dissipated before it reached him, as if hitting an invisible shield. The poltergeist, through Ron, laughed louder. "Can't you just banish it? Repel it?" "Normal magic isn't working, Harry. It's too insidious. It's woven itself into him. It's not just possessing him, it's consuming him." Hermione gasped, her fingers tracing ancient runes in a book that looked as though it hadn't been opened in centuries. Its pages were brittle, yellowed, smelling of dust and forgotten magic. The title, embossed in faded silver, read, "The Ancient Grimoire of Spirit Bane." Her breath hitched. This was it. She'd always avoided this section of her research materials. It delved into magic that was less about spells and more about intent, about sacrifice, about the deep, primal forces of the world. She'd always considered it too dangerous, too unpredictable. But now, with Ron convulsing, his body being weaponized against them, she had no choice. "Harry, I think I've found something," she said, her voice barely a whisper, eyes glued to the elaborate, spidery script on the page. This grimoire, it talks about occupants. Ancient, malevolent spirits that latch onto extreme emotional distress. Poltergeists, but far more powerful, far more sentient. Ron let out a strangled shriek, his body spasming violently on the cot. A small, wooden stool levitated and crashed against the tent wall, splintering. His head whipped around, and for a fleeting moment, his eyes were clear, filled with desperate pleading, a flicker of the real Ron breaking through the oppressive fog. Help me," he choked out, before his face contorted again, and the cruel, alien laughter returned. "Don't listen. He wants to be free. He'll just let you down again." Harry's heart ached. He hated seeing Ron like this, hated being unable to help him. "What does it say, Hermione? Can we get it out?" Hermione swallowed hard, her finger tracing a particularly disturbing illustration of a spectral figure emerging from a human host. "It's complicated. And dangerous. It's not a simple banishing spell. The grimoire calls for an exorcism of reclamation. Exorcism," Harry repeated, his blood running cold. This sounded like something out of a horror story, not practical magic. "Yes, It requires a convergence of external ritual magic and the host's internal will to fight the spirit. The entity feeds on despair, on the willingness to be consumed. To expel it, the host must actively, consciously, and fiercely desire its expulsion, drawing on their deepest reservoirs of self-worth and purpose. She looked up at Harry, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and determination. It's like fighting a battle on two fronts. We perform the ritual, but Ron has to fight it from within. And if he can't? Harry asked, dread pooling in his stomach. Hermione closed her eyes for a moment, steeling herself. Then the ritual could fail. The spirit could strengthen, consolidate its hold, or even destroy him in its backlash. She reopened her eyes, meeting Harry's gaze. This ritual, it's a gamble, Harry. A massive one. It's incredibly draining for both the casters and the host. The grimoire warns of severe physical and mental trauma, even death, if the host's will wavers or the ritual isn't performed precisely. It specifically states that the entity will retaliate with everything it has, manifesting the host's darkest fears, trying to break their will. Ron's thrashing subsided slightly, replaced by a low, rhythmic moan. The tent went eerily still, save for the oppressive hum of the poltergeist's presence. His gaze was fixed on Hermione, a horrifying intelligence now in his eyes, as if it understood every word. Reclamation? Foolish little girl. He has nothing to reclaim. He's always been empty. A shadow. The voice used condescension, laced with a malicious triumph. Hermione flinched, but quickly regained her composure. It also requires specific preparations, she continued, ignoring the spirit's taunts. Rare components, a circle of ancient wards, a specific incantation that must be delivered with absolute focus and unity. It's meant for multiple casters working in tandem. She glanced at Harry, then back at the grimoire. The grimoire is very clear. This is a last resort. But Harry, if we do nothing, he won't just be possessed. He'll be gone. His soul devoured, his body a puppet for this thing. Harry looked from the ancient, forbidding book to Ron's tormented form. Ron's eyes, even with the malevolent intelligence burning in them, still held that flicker of pain, that ghost of the friend he knew. He was still in there. Barely. We have to try, Hermione, Harry said, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. We have to. What do we need? Tell me everything. Hermione nodded, her jaw set. She turned a page, revealing a diagram of intricate symbols and a list of components, some of which were incredibly rare, others disturbingly symbolic. First, she began, her voice already taking on a methodical, determined tone. We need to find a place away from the tent. A place where we can establish a permanent, secure ritual circle. The grimoire specifies a site of ancient power, cleansed and hallowed. As she spoke, Ron's eyes narrowed, and a cold gust of wind swept through the magically sealed tent, extinguishing the lantern and plunging them into near darkness, save for the faint glow of Hermione's wand. A low growl vibrated from Ron's chest, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage. You won't. He's mine, the distorted voice thundered, and Ron's body began to convulse again, but this time with a focused, terrifying energy, as if preparing for battle. The air crackled with hostility. Hermione didn't falter. And we need to gather these components. Some of them will be difficult to acquire without drawing attention. But the most important thing, Harry, is that we impress upon Ron what he has to do. He has to want to fight it. He has to find the strength within himself to push this thing out. She looked at Ron, whose eyes were now burning with an unholy light. And we have to do it quickly. The longer it stays, the stronger it gets, and the less of Ron will be left to reclaim. She paused, looking at the complex diagram in the grimoire. This ritual, it must be performed at moonrise, on the night of the winter solstice. The energies are aligned then. That gives us 2 days. 2 days. To find a hidden location, gather impossible ingredients, and prepare for a magical battle that could very well end with Ron's death or permanent damnation. Harry looked at Ron, whose struggles were becoming more violent, more desperate, as if the spirit itself sensed the threat and was preparing its defense. This wasn't just an exorcism. It was an all-out war for Ron's very soul, and they were racing against time, with an enemy that lived inside their friend. The air inside the tent was thick with a nervous hum that had nothing to do with the charm-laden walls. Hermione, her face a mask of fierce concentration, adjusted the final protective ward around the central ritual circle. Scrolls of ancient parchment, inscribed with thorny runes and faded diagrams, lay unfurled at her feet. The grimoire of Spiritbane opened to a page titled Apotropaic Rites of the Soul's Reclamation. Its heavy, leather-bound form radiated an age-old power, a silent, watchful presence. Ron sat slumped in the middle of the circle, bound by soft, glowing ropes of a sticking charm, not to restrain him, but to keep him centered and provide a conduit for the cleansing magic. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, flickering with a terrifying mix of his own fear and the malevolent gleam of the entity that now shared his skull. His breaths came in shallow, ragged gasps, his body twitching sporadically as if invisible strings pulled at his limbs. Harry stood opposite Hermione, his wand held steady, his knuckles white. He'd helped Hermione with the intricate setup, his heart a leaden weight in his chest. "Ready, Hermione?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper, not wanting to disturb the fragile calm. Hermione nodded, her eyes sweeping over the complex array of ingredients: dried mandrake root, powdered moonstone, vials of distilled belladonna, and a small, shimmering silver chalice filled with what she'd called consecrated dew. "As ready as we'll ever be, Harry. Remember the instructions from the grimoire. My incantations maintain the barrier and channel the expulsion magic. Your counter curses and protective charms must hold the perimeter against its retaliation. Ron needs to fight from within. This is as much his battle as ours." She met Harry's gaze, a flicker of raw terror in her usually unflappable eyes. "If he breaks, Harry, if he doesn't push it out, we might just tear him apart with the spirit." The grimoire was very clear about that. Ron's head snapped up, his lips peeling back in a silent snarl, revealing teeth too sharp, too wolfish. A low, guttural growl rumbled in his chest, and his eyes, for a chilling moment, glowed a vibrant, unnatural green. Harry's blood ran cold. "It knows," he murmured, raising his wand higher. Hermione took a deep breath, her own wand rising, tracing complex patterns in the air. Her voice, usually so clear and precise, took on a deeper, resonant quality as she began to chant the ancient words from the grimoire. "Spiritus malignis, abige. Ex hoc corpore, ex hoc anima, ex hoc hospite, egredere." As the words echoed, a faint, silvery light emanated from Hermione's wand, spreading outwards, clinging to the tent walls, solidifying the protective wards. Harry mirrored her, his own wand casting a shimmering, golden shield over Ron's bound form, creating a cocoon of light. The instant the magic took hold, the tent recoiled. The air turned frigid, then searing hot. The delicate instruments on Hermione's table vibrated violently, rattling against each other. The faint smell of ozone and damp earth filled their nostrils. A low, mocking chuckle, impossibly deep and hoarse, seemed to ripple through the very fabric of the tent, distinct yet everywhere at once. "It begins," Hermione gritted out, her brow furrowed in concentration. Ron's body began to convulse, fighting against the glowing ropes that held him. His head thrashed from side to side, sweat plastering his hair to his forehead. His eyes squeezed shut, but a torrent of whispers, insidious and sharp, began to pour from his lips. Not his voice, not quite, but a distorted, cruel echo of familiar tones. "Worthless, always second best. He's the true chosen one, Ron, not you. You're a burden, a drain. They don't need you." The whispers were relentless, a cacophony of doubt and inadequacy, each word a venomous dart aimed directly at Ron's most tender wounds. He groaned, a sound of pure agony, as his internal world was ravaged. "No, stop it." Ron screamed inside his head, but the sound was swallowed by the relentless tide of accusation. He saw Fred's disappointed shake of the head, Percy's sneering dismissiveness, Ginny's pitying glances. He saw Harry's dazzling fame, Hermione's effortless brilliance, dwarfing him, shrinking him until he was nothing but a speck of dust. They're going to leave you, just like everyone else. The collective voice hissed, growing louder, more piercing. You're just delaying them, holding them back from their real destiny. A jolt of raw fear shot through Ron. He felt a profound, aching loneliness and icy grip around his heart, telling him it was true. He was alone. They didn't need him. He was just a mistake, a bumbling sidekick. The despair was a suffocating blanket, pressing down, threatening to extinguish the last flicker of his own will. Outside the mental onslaught, the poltergeist was escalating its physical assault. The tent poles creaked and groaned as if under immense pressure, the fabric stretching taut, threatening to rip. Objects around the circle, Hermione's potion phials, Harry's discarded cloak, even the heavy grimoire, began to lift and hurl themselves against Harry's protective shield. Crash! Thud! The impact rattled Harry's teeth, and he had to brace himself, tightening his grip on his wand. Protego Maxima, he roared, pouring more magic into his defense, gritting his teeth as a heavy, iron cauldron flew past, narrowly missing his head before disintegrating against the golden barrier. Hermione, though visibly straining, maintained her incantations, her voice unwavering. Keep the shield strong, Harry. It's trying to break our concentration. Egomando T. EXI. EXI. Suddenly, Ron's body arched, a horrifying, unnatural contortion. His eyes snapped open, blazing with an alien fury, fixed on Harry. A growl ripped from his throat, and the binding ropes, which had been holding firm, began to fray, smoke rising from their magically glowing fibers. You, always the favorite. Ron's voice, but not his, deep and rasping, sliced through the air, directed at Harry. She loves you. Not the blood traitor. The force of the words, coupled with the entity's attempt to break free, sent a shockwave through the ritual circle. Harry stumbled, his shield flickering. His heart hammered. Hermione, noticing the ropes weakening, frantically adjusted her focus. Hold, Ron. Fight it. Don't let it take control. Inside Ron's mind, the whispers morphed into terrifying visions. The tent walls melted away, replaced by the suffocating darkness of Aragog's lair. Enormous, hairy legs scuttled towards him, eyes gleaming with hunger. But this time, it wasn't just spiders. His deepest, most primal fears took shape. He saw his family, their faces contorted in disappointment, holding a tattered, worthless version of him. He saw Hermione, her hand in Harry's, turning her back on him, her eyes cold. You never belonged here, Weasley, a booming voice echoed, shaking his very soul. It was the voice of 1,000 Dementors, feeding on his despair. You're a failure. A joke. A mistake. Ron gasped, his eyes squeezed shut, tears leaking from the corners. The mental assault was overwhelming. He felt himself shrinking, retreating into a tiny, forgotten corner of his own mind, wishing for oblivion. He couldn't fight this. It was too strong. Every insecurity he'd ever harbored, every unspoken fear, was magnified 1,000-fold, crushing him beneath its weight. He felt the entity, a cold, slimy presence, pushing deeper, trying to consume the last vestiges of his identity. He was so tired. It would be so easy to just let go, to stop fighting, to let the darkness take him. A phantom touch, cold and spectral, grazed his face. He felt his own body, his hands, clawing at the ropes, trying to break free. The entity wanted to turn him against his friends, to end the ritual. He saw, through a hazy, despairing fog, Harry straining, his face pale, sweat dripping down his temple as he fought to hold the shield. He saw Hermione, her lips moving rapidly, her entire being radiating desperate resolve. No. The thought was small, fragile, a tiny spark in the vast, crushing darkness. No. They wouldn't leave me. He remembered Hermione's unwavering loyalty, her tireless research to save him. He remembered Harry, always at his side. Even when Ron had abandoned him during the hunt, he'd still come back. He remembered them, risking everything, just for him. A surge of defiant warmth, like a tiny ember igniting, flickered within his chest. It was minuscule against the inferno of despair, but it was there. They're my friends. They believe in me. I have to fight. The poltergeist, sensing this sliver of resistance, reacted with a shriek of pure, unadulterated rage that ripped through the tent, echoing from every surface. The air solidified, pressing down on Harry and Hermione, making it difficult to breathe, to move. The tent itself seemed to be collapsing inwards. Ron's body, now freed from the fraying ropes, shot upwards, limbs flailing, suspended midair. His face, contorted in a horrifying parody of his own features, twisted into a venomous leer. The eyes, now blazing with a sickly green light, locked onto Hermione. "You think you can stop me?" The entity rasped through Ron's mouth, its voice dripping with ancient malice. "You think your petty magic can banish a spirit older than your so-called ministry? I will tear him apart from the inside, and then I will take you both." A thick, inky shadow began to bleed from Ron's pores, swirling around him, coalescing into spectral, grasping claws. The tent plunged into an oppressive darkness, illuminated only by the frantic bursts of light from Harry and Hermione's wands, and the malevolent glow in Ron's eyes. The true fight had just begun. The tent bucked and roared like a beast caught in a gale, though the storm outside was now merely a relentless drizzle. Inside, a maelstrom of raw, malevolent energy churned, mirroring the tempest within Ron's mind. The air crackled with expelled magic and the chilling echo of mocking laughter. Harry and Hermione, their faces streaked with grime and sweat, knelt opposite each other, forming the final points of the intricately drawn rune circle. The ancient grimoire lay open between them, its parchment glowing faintly with a sickly green light, the script writhing like living worms. Hermione's voice, though hoarse, was a steel thread of determination, chanting the complex incantations in Latin, her eyes fixed on Ron's writhing form in the center. "Spiritus malis, ab hac forma seed. Recede ab anima pura," she intoned, her wand clutched tight, pouring every ounce of her will into the words. Harry, his brow furrowed in concentration, kept his wand pointed at the ceiling, deflecting the volley of objects the poltergeist hurled at them. A tarnished kettle whistled past his ear, narrowly missing him. A heavy, leather-bound book slammed into the tent pole, rattling it violently. Whispers slithered into his mind, venomous and seductive. "He blames you, Harry. For everything. For Fred. For Dumbledore. You lead him to this. You let it happen." He gritted his teeth, forcing the intrusive thoughts away. "It's lying, Hermione." "Keep going," he yelled, a powerful Protego shield flaring to life, deflecting a barrage of rusty spoons. He could feel his own magic draining, a cold ache spreading through his limbs, but the image of Ron, pale and convulsing, spurred him on. They couldn't fail. Not now. Inside Ron's mind, the world was a shattered mirror of his deepest fears. He was trapped in a vast, echoing chamber, its walls shifting between the burrow's cramped living room, a desolate corner of the Hogwarts library, and the chilling silence of his darkest nightmares. The poltergeist, a formless mass of shadow and teeth, towered over him, its presence suffocating. "You are nothing," it hissed, its voice 1,000 whispers, each one Ron's own. "A spare. A burden. Your friends pretend to care, but they know. You hold them back. Harry is the chosen one. Hermione is the brightest witch of her age. And you're just Ron." Memories flooded him, twisted and magnified. Percy's haughty disdain. Fred and George's exasperated amusement. His mother's worried frown. Harry and Hermione's moments of shared understanding, where he felt utterly excluded. The time he'd left them, the cowardice stinging him anew, magnified 100-fold by the spirit's venom. He felt himself shrinking, curling into a ball, the despair of physical weight pressing him down, grinding him into dust. "They will forget you," the spirit gloated, looming closer. "Once I am done, they will be relieved. You will be a bad memory, a distraction purged." It reached out with a spectral claw, the touch icy and searing, tearing at his very essence. Ron screamed, but no sound escaped. He was unraveling, threads of his identity snapping, one by one. Just as the last sliver of hope threatened to extinguish, a defiant spark ignited. It wasn't a grand, heroic thought, but a raw, unyielding anger. No, not anger at his friends, not anger at the world. Anger at it. At this parasitic thing, twisting his truth, daring to tell him who he was. A flicker of memory, Hermione, her face stern but full of concern, reading the ritual's words. Harry, always there, always fighting beside him. The feeling of belonging, the warmth of their friendship, something the poltergeist couldn't touch, because it wasn't a fear, it was a fact. He was Ron Weasley. The loyal one. The one who always came back. The one who might make mistakes, but who never stopped trying. You're wrong. Ron's voice, weak at first, then gaining strength, echoed in the mental chamber. I'm not useless. I'm here. I'm fighting. He pushed against the invisible weight, his muscles screaming. The spectral claw recoiled slightly. The poltergeist paused, its form flickering, surprised by the sudden resistance. Foolish boy. You cling to falsehoods. Your pathetic self-worth is a lie. No, Ron roared, finding a surge of energy he didn't know he possessed. My worth isn't defined by Harry. It's not defined by Hermione. It's mine. I'm Ron Weasley. I faced spiders bigger than your lies. I faced a basilisk. I played Quidditch for Gryffindor. I stuck by my friends when it was hard. And I'm going to stick by myself now. With each declaration, a tiny fissure appeared in the overwhelming darkness. The chamber walls shimmered, briefly showing the familiar, if tattered, fabric of the tent. He was seeing through the spirit's illusion, perceiving a faint light beyond. Outside, the tent seemed to shudder, a deep groan emanating from its very structure. Harry and Hermione felt a sudden shift, the poltergeist's attacks becoming more erratic, less focused, imbued with a raw, desperate fury. It was hurting. Ron was fighting back. He's doing it, Harry. Hermione gasped, her voice raw with exertion, pointing at the grimoire. The next verse. The binding. Harry nodded, his eyes shining with renewed hope, pouring more magic into his shield, pushing back the chaotic energy that threatened to rip the tent apart. Let's finish it. Inside, Ron stood tall, his hands clenched into fists. He remembered Ginny's bravery, Fred and George's unwavering confidence, his mum's fierce love. He wasn't them, but he was him. And he was enough. You feed on my fear, Ron spat, his voice laced with iron. But I choose to starve you. Get out of my head. Get out of my body. You don't belong here. The poltergeist shrieked, a sound that tore at the fabric of the mindscape, manifesting as physical pain in Ron's chest. It lunged, no longer trying to subtly undermine him, but to utterly annihilate him. Its shadowy claws reached for his throat, intent on choking the life from his defiance. But Ron met its charge, not with a spell, but with pure, unadulterated will. He imagined a wall of fire, forged from his determination, from the fierce loyalty he felt for his friends, from the love of his family, from his own stubborn Gryffindor heart. He didn't just push back, he attacked. He visualized himself ripping the spirit's tendrils from his mind, severing its connections, screaming for it to leave. Exsurge. Exsurge Animus Weasley. Hermione's voice, amplified by the ritual, cut through the internal chaos, a beacon of light in the darkness. Spiritus Malice, E Corpus Effuge. Exorcism Est. Her wand glowed white-hot, as did Harry's, their combined magic surging into the rune circle. The symbols flared, burning bright green, then a brilliant, cleansing gold. The grimoire levitated, pages flapping wildly, as if eager to shed its ancient power. Ron felt a searing pain, as if his very nerves were being flayed, but it was different now. It was the pain of something being ripped out, not clawing in. He focused on that feeling, on pushing it away, on forcing the parasitic presence to retreat. He saw the poltergeist recoil, its form shrinking, screaming in a voice that was no longer 1,000 whispers, but a single, terrified wail. No, my host, mine, not anymore. Ron roared, focusing every ounce of his being on expelling the intruder. Outside, the tent groaned once more, a final, violent shudder. A wave of ice-cold energy erupted from Ron's body, swirling into a visible, translucent vortex that screamed into the air, tearing through the tent's ceiling with a sound like ripping silk. The raw malice, the chilling despair, the spectral laughter, it all concentrated into a single, terrifying screech before shooting upwards, a shadowy projectile vanishing into the stormy night. The rune circle flared one last time, a blinding pulse of golden light, then faded. Ron's body went limp, collapsing back onto the ground. The tent was silent, save for the patter of rain and the heavy, ragged breaths of Harry and Hermione. They stared at Ron, utterly exhausted, their wands dropping from numb fingers. He lay still, unnaturally so, his chest barely rising. The tent was in ruins, objects scattered, a gaping hole torn in the ceiling. But the malevolent presence was gone. They felt it, the sudden absence, like a suffocating weight had been lifted. Hermione scrambled forward, her hands shaking as she reached for Ron. His skin was clammy, his pulse thready. He was unconscious, utterly spent. But he was breathing, and the look on his face, though pale, was no longer contorted by fear. It was peaceful. "Ron," Harry whispered, his voice cracking, kneeling beside them. Relief, so potent it threatened to buckle his knees, washed over him. He reached out, tentatively touching Ron's arm. Then a low, guttural growl vibrated through the ground, not from the tent, but from somewhere deep beneath them. A low, mocking chuckle echoed faintly on the wind, a sound too light, too fleeting to be real, yet too distinct to be ignored. Was it truly gone? Or had they merely driven it out, not banished it completely? And what had it left behind, lurking in the shadows, a promise of its return? The final syllable of the ancient incantation died in the air, leaving a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight. The shimmering silver barrier around Ron collapsed inward, not with a bang, but a soft, fading whisper, like a sigh of released breath. Harry and Hermione, collapsed on either side of the prone figure of their friend, were shaking uncontrollably, their wands still smoking faintly, their faces pale and streaked with sweat and tears. For a long moment, nothing happened. The air in the tent, previously a maelstrom of fear and malevolence, was now eerily still, heavy with residual magic and the spent energy of 3 exhausted wizards. The oppressive chill that had clung to the space for days had lifted, replaced by the mundane, slightly stuffy warmth of the magically expanded canvas. Then Ron stirred. He let out a shaky gasp, a sound that tore through the quiet. His eyes fluttered open, blinking against the dim light filtering through the tent's ceiling. The raw, primal terror that had glazed them for so long was gone, replaced by an unsettling blankness, a dazed confusion. He looked around, his gaze settling on Harry's wild, panicked face, then Hermione's, whose tears had finally started to fall freely. "Ron," Harry whispered, his voice hoarse, afraid to hope. Ron didn't answer immediately. He slowly pushed himself up, his limbs trembling violently, like a newborn colt trying to find its footing. He brought a hand to his temple, pressing against it as if to quell a raging headache. A shudder ran through his entire body. "It's quiet," he finally rasped, his own voice sounding foreign to him, almost a stranger's. The words were simple, yet loaded with the unspeakable horror of what had transpired. The incessant, insidious whispers, the taunts, the chilling glee of the occupant, all gone. A vast, echoing emptiness remained where the entity had been, a void that was both terrifying and exquisitely liberating. Hermione scrambled closer, her face a mix of profound relief and lingering fear. "Ron, are you all right? Really all right?" Her hand reached out, hovering uncertainly before gently touching his arm. He flinched, not from pain, but from the sudden, gentle contact. He looked at Hermione, truly looked at her, and then at Harry. The frantic worry etched on their faces, the exhaustion, the utter devotion in their eyes. It hit him like a physical blow. He saw the weeks of terror, the desperate battle, the unwavering loyalty they had shown, all for him. And he remembered, with horrifying clarity, snippets of what he had done under the spirit's control, the cruel words, the violent shoves, the sheer, malicious intent directed at the two people he loved most. A fresh wave of shame, sharp and potent, threatened to buckle him. I'm so sorry, he choked out, his voice thick with emotion. Tears pricked at his own eyes. I remember bits of it. What I said. What I did. Harry was instantly by his side, clapping a firm hand on his shoulder. It wasn't you, Ron. Never you. It was the bloody thing. You were fighting it, mate. We saw it. He's right, Hermione affirmed, her voice softer than Ron had heard it in weeks. You fought it from within. That's what saved you, Ron. That's what made the ritual work. Ron looked from one to the other, the profound truth of their words slowly sinking in. He had fought. He had stood against the crushing weight of his own insecurities, amplified 1,000-fold by a malevolent entity. He had faced the specters of his inadequacy, the fear of being forever overshadowed, and he had not broken. He had found a defiant spark, a raw, unyielding will to be himself, to be Ron. And in that moment, a fundamental shift occurred within him. The deep-seated insecurity, the nagging fear of inadequacy that had been a constant companion since childhood, had been burned away by the inferno of the possession and his internal struggle. He wasn't free of all his flaws, no. But he was free of the corrosive self-doubt that had always held him back. He had looked into the abyss of his darkest fears and found a strength he never knew he possessed. He wasn't just Harry Potter's best friend, or Hermione Granger's partner, or the sixth Weasley son. He was Ron. And that was enough. More than enough. He felt it physically, like a tightening in his chest that wasn't pain, but purpose. A quiet resolve settled over him, firm and unshakable. He wasn't just lucky to be here, lucky to be part of the trio. He belonged. He had earned his place, not by proxy, but by surviving a battle for his very soul. He took a deep, shuddering breath. It's truly gone, he said again, testing the words, letting them settle. A faint tremor still ran through his body, a phantom echo of the spirit's last desperate thrash. The quiet, it's deafening, but it's good. He managed a weak, almost genuine smile. Like waking up from a nightmare you thought was real. Hermione, ever the pragmatic one, wiped her eyes and looked at the scorched parchment of the grimoire, still open on the floor. The grimoire, it needs to be secured. This magic, it's dangerous, even in the right hands. And it's a powerful thing to have unleashed. She shuddered. I don't think I've ever been so terrified or so relieved. Me neither, Harry admitted, running a hand through his perpetually messy hair. He looked at Ron, a genuine smile finally breaking through his fatigue. Welcome back, mate. Ron nodded, his gaze meeting Harry's. There was a new depth in his eyes, a quiet understanding that passed between them. Harry saw it too, the subtle but profound change in his friend. The hesitant, often sullen expression had been replaced by a look of calm determination. The boy who felt he lived in shadows had stepped into his own light. Thanks, Harry, Ron said, his voice stronger now. Thanks, Hermione. You too, you saved me. Again. We're a team, Ron, Hermione said softly, placing a comforting hand on his knee. Always. The words, once a source of bitter internal debate for Ron, now resonated with a simple truth. He was part of this team, an essential cog, not just a bystander. He had proven his worth not only to them, but to himself. They spent the next few hours in a strange mixture of recovery and renewed purpose. Hermione insisted on brewing several potent reinvigoration potions from their dwindling supply, force-feeding Ron a particularly foul-tasting one. Harry, meanwhile, methodically cleaned up the ritual space, banishing the remains of the dried herbs and shattered crystals with a series of careful evanescos. The grimoire, after much deliberation, was carefully wrapped in protective layers and added to Hermione's increasingly overflowing beaded bag, a potent, perilous tool, to be consulted only in the direst of circumstances. As the magic-induced exhaustion began to recede, replaced by a more natural weariness, Ron felt a renewed surge of energy. He was tired, yes, but it was a good tired, the kind that came after a monumental effort, not the soul-sapping exhaustion of despair. So Ron said, breaking a comfortable silence as he finished his potion. He looked at Harry, a focused glint in his eyes. We still have a job to do, don't we? That locket. It's still out there. Harry looked at him, surprised by the abrupt shift back to their mission, but not unwelcomely so. It was the old Ron, but with a sharper edge, a clearer resolve. Yeah, it is. We need a new plan. After what happened with the poltergeist, we need to be smarter, more careful. No, Ron interrupted, his voice firm. Harry and Hermione looked at him, startled. We need to be bolder. We've wasted too much time. Too much fear. That thing, it fed on my fear. Voldemort feeds on everyone's fear. We can't let him win by being afraid to act. He stood up, his posture straighter, his gaze unwavering. I'm ready. More ready than I've ever been. I know what it feels like to have a piece of darkness try to twist you. It makes me want to rip every single one of those Horcruxes to shreds. And I'm not going to be a liability anymore. Hermione stepped forward, a soft smile gracing her lips. You never were, Ron. Now you know it too, Harry added, his hand going instinctively to his pocket, where the damaged sword of Gryffindor lay. Right. So, what's next? We've got the grimoire, though I hope we don't need to use that again. Any other brilliant ideas, Hermione? Hermione's brow furrowed in thought, a familiar, welcome sight. Well, the grimoire actually contained a few minor divinations and location spells, extremely difficult, highly unreliable, and very taxing. But they might point us in the right general direction if we tried to hone in on a fragment of Voldemort's soul. It's risky, could draw attention, but given our current lack of leads. Ron nodded, his mind already racing, considering the risks and rewards. Risky is better than doing nothing. What's the worst that could happen? We run into some Death Eaters? We're prepared now. Better than hiding and letting fear eat us alive. He saw the flicker of worry in Harry's eyes, a memory of the isolation and paranoia that had almost broken them. But Ron met his gaze steadily, his own radiating a newfound calm. The fear was still there, lurking, but it no longer controlled him. He had faced his greatest demon and survived. He was a different Ron, forged in the crucible of possession, stronger and more determined than ever. So, what are we waiting for? Ron asked, a faint, almost mischievous grin touching his lips. It was the first time they'd seen it in weeks. Let's find the bloody Horcruxes. As Hermione pulled out the grimoire once more, this time with a mixture of reverence and trepidation, and began to flip through its ancient pages, Ron looked out of the tent flap. The sky outside was a bruised purple, promising the approach of dawn. A new day, a new battle. But this time, Ron was ready. He carried no illusions about the ease of their task, but the gnawing doubt, the constant whisper of inadequacy, had been banished. He was a warrior now, hardened by a war not just against Voldemort, but against himself. And the war for his soul, he had won. But as Hermione's finger traced a particular glyph, a symbol she recognized from a long-forgotten family tree of ancient wizarding houses, a fresh wave of unease rippled through her. This divination wasn't just pointing to a Horcrux. It seemed to be leading them to a place connected to an old bloodline, one whispered in hushed tones even among purebloods, the Gaunts. The chilling realization brought a cold dread that had nothing to do with the expelled spirit. The fight was far from over, and its true horrors were only just beginning to reveal themselves.